Morning.
We're doing Really Gratefully and Okage-sama de Arigato. Is that right?
I see. Living gratefully. Yes. Yeah. Welcome to our service today. My name is Devin. Today we'll be chanting Junie Rai on page 67. Again, you can find Junie Rai on page 67.
Namandavits, 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 Namandavits. 계슈天人 職業 阿弥陀千両足尊在非無入
Please stand for the singing of Living Gratefully, found on page 85 in your Gotha book. Please remain standing for the reading of our pledge found in your handout. Our pledge. Breaking out of my shell, I will share a warm smile and speak gentle words, just like the kind Buddha. Not becoming lost in my greed, anger, and ignorance, I shall think and act with an open mind, just like the calm and peaceful Buddha. Not putting myself first, I will share in the joy and sadness of others, just like the compassionate Buddha. Realizing the different joy received, I shall strive to live each day to its fullest, like the Buddha who tirelessly works to liberate all. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Minister's Assistant Leonora Clark will now deliver her Dharma message.
Good morning. Please join me in Gassho. I make a display of knowing the words good and evil. This is an expression of complete falsity. I am such that I do not know right and wrong and cannot distinguish false and true. Shinran Shonin. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Namanda Namanda. I'd like to talk today about a word that doesn't come up very often in discussions of Buddhism, but I think it's one that is critically important to understanding our teachings. It is the word compromise. Compromise is a tricky word, and one that we tend to have a love and hate relationship with. Webster's dictionary defines it in two ways. The first definition says that compromise is to settle a dispute by mutual concession. This is the positive side of compromise, one that brings to mind civics lessons, where we were taught about the brilliance of the American political system, which is rooted in the spirit of compromise. But the second part of the definition is less appealing. It can also mean to accept standards that are lower than is desirable. This is an aspect of compromise that is harder for us to get on board with. We are a country of strivers, And we can't help but to feel that compromise implies that we have fallen short of our ultimate goal. It's like getting the silver or, God forbid, the bronze medal at the Olympics. It is this second part of the definition that I have been struggling with recently. Perhaps it is a natural part of aging. Young people cannot help but strive for greatness. That's what makes being young so wonderful. It's an idealistic time when life's decisions seem so crystal clear, and there seems to be an answer for every question. It's either the high road or the low road. If one doesn't take the path of righteousness, justice, and truth, then things are most definitely not okay. As you get older, life's decisions become much more cloudy. We suddenly find that there are so many variables, both known and unknown, that influence all of life's occurrences. Most of us ultimately find that purity is elusive, and life often gets in the way of reaching that highest bar. And we start to wonder, is that okay too? Compromise is a recurrent theme in Buddhism, and the Buddha defined compromise in an entirely different way than Webster. He understood that the world is not black and white. True reality is made up of an infinite number of interwoven causes and conditions that are constantly changing. Shakyamuni compared life to a river that is flowing past. The river exists at all times, but it is never the same water going by from one moment to the next. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about how the lives of both Shakyamuni Buddha and Shinran Shonin were affected by the need to compromise, and how their experiences can help instruct us in our own lives. I'll start, of course, with Shakyamuni, because historically he came first. Shakyamuni started his path as a relatively young man. At the age of 29, he set off with a pretty lofty ambition, which was to transcend the cycle of birth and death. I'm not actually sure what that would look like, but truly his aspiration makes winning the Olympic gold seem like child's play. He abandoned his comfortable householder existence, determined to tame his body through the most rigorous of austerities. He was what we might call today an overachieving ascetic. He studied under a group of forest-dwelling sages, and in time he surpassed them all in the practices of yoga and meditation. His self-deprivation knew no bounds, and if you have seen representations of how he looked at this time, you'll remember that he looks absolutely skeletal. It's a wonder that he did not kill himself. However, after 7 years of this life, what he ultimately came to realize was one very simple fact, which was that he was very hungry. And this was perhaps his most important realization. And when a young girl named Sujata offered him some rice gruel, his 7-year resolve suddenly broke down like a dam under pressure, and he gratefully took the food. When he had finished his meal, he had compromised the purity of his practice, but it was the strength that that rice gruel provided him with that enabled him to finally take a seat calmly under the Bodhi tree, engage in a final battle with his mind, and as the dawn approached, to reach an enlightened state. Ultimately, his bliss was built not on strength, but on weakness. In Jodo Shinshu doctrine, we would say that Shakyamuni rejected the path of self-power, which is the idea that nirvana can be reached through our own efforts, and instead he sought refuge in the path of a compassionate other power when he opened himself up to receiving the gift of food from Sujata. This experience led him to his most critical teaching, the concept of the middle path. When I first learned about this teaching, I interpreted it quite literally. I imagined a high road and a low road and a middle path that ran right smack in between them. However, when I was taking a class several years ago from Professor Tokuno at the University of Washington, she explained it in a different and I think much more elegant way. She told us that the middle path can be explained in 2 words, and those 2 words are, it depends. It took me a while to figure out what she was talking about, but I finally realized that she was referring to the variability in life that I mentioned earlier. It means there is no clear answer to every question. In a sense, this is a hard truth. We all long for some sort of conclusive ending, a happily ever after. But happily ever afters do not exist in real life because there's always the next day when something else will happen. Perhaps you will burn your toast or fall out of bed or maybe even move to Antarctica. There can never be any hard and fast rules for every occasion. Every truth is relative. This is difficult for us to accept, especially in America, where we have been spoon-fed on a Judeo-Christian heritage which tells us that there are very much hard and fast rules and that there are 10 of them, and whether or not you follow them or not is the sole determining factor in your destiny. To truly be Buddhist, we must reject this view and embrace the cloudiness that represents the true state of the world. Shakyamuni Buddha's encounter with compromise is echoed in the life of Shinran Shonin. If we fast forward 1,500 years, we find Shinran Shonin in very much the same position as Shakyamuni was prior to his awakening. Shinran was immersed in a 20-year struggle to attain enlightenment. This enlightenment was proving elusive for him as it was for his predecessor. Like Shakyamuni, at a certain point, he decided he had had enough. No matter how much merit he was able to accumulate through Nembutsu repetition, it would never be enough to purify his mind of all its blemishes. Ultimately, he rejected the path of self-power and left the monastery on Mount Hiei to follow the other power path that was taught by Master Honen. It was an unorthodox decision. It's hard for us to imagine it today, but Honen was actually infamous in medieval Japan for having the audacity to teach the lower classes and even the dregs of Kyoto society. But for Shinran, the Nembutsu was his path of liberation. He is quoted in the Tanisho as saying, "Even if I discover that I have been misled by Honen Shonin, and that because I have said the Nembutsu I will fall into hell, I will have no regrets." Like Shakyamuni, it was Shinran Shonin's failure and his willingness to compromise that led him to find peace of mind. So what do the lives of these 2 men teach us? For me, these ideas have been helpful in working through my own life's experiences, and more specifically in the past few months, my expectations for my son as he transitions into adulthood. For a parent, when your child turns 18, it feels like the ending of a story, and your mind can't help but wonder, well, how did I do? How did things turn out? Will he live happily ever after? What my study of Buddhism has helped me to realize is that it will never be as clear-cut as that. He will have some good days and some bad days. In fact, he will likely have some good years and bad years. And maybe the bad ones, far from being something to avoid at all costs, will actually teach him the most. It's going to be hard, but most of all, I am realizing that I must simply stand by and watch his life evolve and change in an unending stream of variability and uncertainty, and that it won't ever be either okay or not okay. And that's okay. Please join me in Gassho. Obstructions of karmic evil turn into virtues. It is like the relation of ice and water. The more ice, the more water. The more obstructions, the more virtues. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Leonora, for your Dharma message. Please join me in Gassho for words from the collected works of Shinran. The master of Kwangming Temple states, "It is regrettable indeed that sentient beings doubt that we should not be doubted. The Pure Land is right before us and never out of harmony with us. Do not ponder whether Amida will take you in or not. The question is whether or not you wholeheartedly turn about at heart. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu." Please stand for the Gatha Okage-sama de Arigato, found on page 104 of your Gatha book. Please be seated. This concludes the live streaming of our service today. If you have joined us online, please join us again next Sunday. Following this service, we'll have several option programs for you to attend.